Amazon buried a James Bond streaming deal that would have changed everything, and the reason they killed it is something they never wanted you to know. In early 2022, before the ink was dry on Amazon's $8.45 billion MGM acquisition, a canonical Bond miniseries was internally greenlit. Budgets were discussed. A creative team was being assembled. And then nothing. No announcement, no leak, just silence. And that silence was entirely deliberate. Here's what they won't tell you. This didn't die because the project was bad. It didn't die because audiences wouldn't watch. It died because of a clause in a contract most journalists never bothered to read, and the real reason is worse than you think. The story begins in 2019. MGM was shopping itself quietly. The studio had survived a near bankruptcy in 2010 and was carrying significant debt into the streaming era. Bond was the asset everyone wanted. Apple, Netflix, and Amazon were all circling. Amazon moved fastest. By May 2021, the deal was announced, $8.45 billion, $1 of the largest entertainment acquisitions in Hollywood history. Jeff Bezos called Bond out by name in the announcement. Prime Video was going to be the home of the world's most valuable spy franchise. What the press releases didn't mention was the Eon Productions agreement. Barbara Broccoli and her brother Michael G. Wilson don't just produce Bond films, they control them. Their family's arrangement with MGM, renegotiated multiple times since 1962, gives Eon creative approval over every Bond project. Every casting decision, every script, every distribution window. Amazon bought MGM. They did not fully buy Bond. By late 2022, Amazon's streaming division had drafted a full proposal. A 6-episode miniseries, working title internally referenced as Bridge, set in the gap between the Brosnan and Craig eras of the franchise. Budget conversations placed the series between $180 and $220 million total. For context, Amazon had already committed 8 figures per episode for Rings of Power. They were prepared to go higher for Bond. The streaming rights pitch had reached Eon Productions with the full weight of an $8.45 billion acquirer behind it. The deal was signed at the term sheet stage. Then it vanished. Specific names from inside Amazon's streaming division were attached to the project. A showrunner with a prestige television track record was reportedly in early conversations. Location scouts had been consulted. This wasn't a pitch deck on a conference room whiteboard. It was a production moving toward a green light. And then in the space of a few months in 2023, every conversation went quiet simultaneously. Remember that signed term sheet from early 2022? Here's where it started to die. Barbara Broccoli had made her position on streaming clear, publicly, repeatedly, and without qualification. She has described Bond as a fundamentally theatrical experience, incompatible with a platform window. But the version of those conversations the public never heard took place in writing, between Amazon executives and Eon Productions' legal representation, where the terms of the original MGM-Eon agreement were laid out plainly. Any Bond content not approved by Eon and not destined for theatrical release would trigger a contractual breach, not just of the streaming project, of the entire franchise agreement. Amazon had spent $8.45 billion and discovered 1 year in that they had bought a vault they couldn't fully open. And here is the part that almost no coverage gets right. This was not killed by failure. It was killed by success. Bond remains one of the only franchises on Earth that reliably generates $600 million in global theatrical revenue without a superhero suit or a cinematic universe. No Time to Die grossed $774 million worldwide in 2021 during a pandemic recovery market. That number is exactly why Amazon could not win this fight. If they had pushed the streaming project against Eon's explicit objection and the story went public, and it would have gone public, the resulting dispute would have damaged the Bond brand at the most critical transition point in the franchise's history. The next Bond search had already been underway since Daniel Craig's exit in 2021. No actor wants to be announced as Bond while the production company and the studio are in a public legal conflict over the franchise's future. The theatrical machine, with its guaranteed global floor, was simply worth more than the streaming win. So Amazon made a calculated decision. They dropped the miniseries. They released the assembled creative team with no public statement. They accepted a situation where they own MGM, and the most iconic property in MGM's catalog continues to exist entirely on its own terms, outside their control. Bridge was shelved, not scrapped for quality reasons, not paused pending casting, but quietly, deliberately buried. Think about what a canonical streaming Bond would have meant for the industry. Every spy franchise on every platform would have had to respond. A 6-episode, $200 million series on Prime Video would have restructured the prestige streaming landscape overnight. It would have brought Bond to the generation that watches everything on a phone and has never sat through a 2-hour 40-minute theatrical film. The 4-year casting search that's still producing no announcement would have had streaming-era proof of concept to draw from. Barbara Broccoli invoked one contract clause and changed the shape of streaming history without issuing a single press release. Which raises the one question nobody has answered on the record. What happens when Barbara Broccoli is no longer the one making those calls? Because there is already another studio sitting on a buried deal just like this one. And that story is even harder to find.